My name is Diana Hartwell and I am 34 years old. I work as a registered nurse in Phoenix, Arizona. My mother texted me saying she could not afford to contribute anything to my son's 5th birthday party. I said no worries and told her not to stress about it. 3 days later, I saw her walking out of an upscale resort carrying shopping bags from the luxury boutique inside. Laughing with my sister Amanda about the spa packages they had just booked for the following weekend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand exactly how I got to that moment standing in that parking lot, watching my mother lie to my face about money, while simultaneously spending hundreds of dollars on my sister without a second thought. I grew up in Scottsdale, a suburb of Phoenix known for its wealth and pristine golf courses. My family was not wealthy, but we were comfortable. My father worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, traveling frequently but earning a solid income that kept us in a nice neighborhood with good schools. My mother was a homemaker who dedicated herself fully to managing our household and, more specifically, to managing the appearance of our family's success. From my earliest memories, I understood that my sister Amanda was special. She was born first, arriving 3 years before me, and she possessed the kind of effortless charm that made adults smile and other children want to be her friend. She was pretty in that conventional way that people immediately recognize and reward, with blonde hair that caught the light and blue eyes that seemed to sparkle when she laughed. She was outgoing and confident, the kind of child who could walk into any room and immediately become its center. I was different. I had dark hair like my father's side of the family, and a serious demeanor that adults often mistook for shyness or unfriendliness. I preferred books to parties and felt more comfortable in small groups than in the chaotic social situations that Amanda navigated with such ease. I was not unattractive, but I was not the kind of pretty that opened doors or made strangers immediately warm to you. I was ordinary in a family that valued exceptional. My mother made it clear from early on that Amanda's happiness and success were the family's primary concerns. Amanda's room was twice the size of mine, decorated with expensive furniture, and updated regularly to reflect her changing tastes. My room remained the same from childhood through high school, painted a pale yellow that I had chosen when I was 6 and never been offered the chance to change. When I finally asked if I could repaint it during my sophomore year, my mother sighed and said that paint was expensive and my room was fine the way it was. 6 months later, Amanda decided she wanted an accent wall in her bedroom, and my mother hired a professional painter to create an elaborate geometric design in shades of coral and gold. Birthdays illustrated the disparity with painful clarity. Amanda's birthday parties were events that required months of planning and significant financial investment. When she turned 7, my parents rented out a section of a local amusement park and invited her entire class plus various neighborhood children. There were personalized party favors, a professional photographer, and a custom cake that cost more than my parents typically spent on groceries in a week. When she turned 13, my mother threw her a spa party at an upscale resort where a dozen of her friends received manicures, facials, and had their hair professionally styled before attending a catered dinner. For her 16th birthday, my parents surprised her with a car. A used Honda Civic that was nevertheless a car, something tangible and valuable that represented freedom and independence. My birthdays were markedly different. I typically received a cake from the grocery store bakery, and a small gathering of family members. No friends were invited because my mother said our house was too small to accommodate a real party, despite the fact that we had hosted Amanda's elaborate celebrations in that same house for years. My gifts were practical items like school supplies, clothing I needed anyway, or books from the discount bin at the local bookstore. When I turned 16, the age when Amanda had received a car, my parents gave me a gift card to a chain restaurant and told me I could take a few friends out to dinner if I wanted. I did not have enough close friends to make that seem appealing, so I used the gift card to buy dinner for myself over the course of several weeks, eating alone and trying not to think about what the disparity in our birthday celebrations meant about my value in my family. Education funding followed the same pattern. Amanda decided during her junior year of high school that she wanted to attend Arizona State University and study communications. It was not a particularly ambitious choice, as ASU accepted most in-state applicants and the communications program was known for being relatively undemanding. Nevertheless, my parents were thrilled. They toured the campus with her, helped her decorate her dorm room with expensive bedding and furniture, and paid her full tuition, room, and board without hesitation. They gave her a generous monthly allowance for food, entertainment, and personal expenses. They even paid for her to join a sorority, covering the membership fees, social dues, and the expensive wardrobe of designer clothes that sorority life seemed to require. When it was my turn to apply to colleges 2 years later, I had different ambitions. I wanted to become a nurse, drawn to the profession by a genuine desire to help people, and an aptitude for science that my teachers had consistently praised. I researched nursing programs extensively and was accepted to several, including the well-regarded program at the University of Arizona. When I showed my acceptance letter to my parents, excited about the opportunity and the scholarship I had earned that would cover half of my tuition, my mother's response was immediate and deflating. "Nursing school is very expensive, Diana. Even with your scholarship, we would need to pay for half your tuition plus room and board. That is a significant financial burden. Have you considered attending community college for your prerequisites and then transferring? It would be much more affordable and we could help you more if the costs were lower." I felt the familiar sting of being treated as less important, less worthy of investment. Amanda's less prestigious degree at a more expensive university had been funded without question, but my scholarship to a competitive program was being met with concerns about affordability and suggestions that I choose a cheaper option. I understood the subtext clearly. Amanda's education and experience were worth the investment. Mine were not. I did not argue or complain. I had learned years earlier that protesting the unfair treatment only made me seem ungrateful and difficult. Instead, I smiled and said I would look into the community college option. Then I went to my room and researched every scholarship, grant, and financial aid opportunity one could find. I applied to dozens of programs, wrote countless essays, and eventually cobbled together enough funding to cover most of my expenses. I took out student loans for the remainder, signing the promissory notes with a mixture of determination and resentment, knowing that I was going into debt for an education my sister had received for free. I worked throughout college, picking up shifts at a local coffee shop and later as a nursing assistant at a hospital near campus. I studied between customers, reviewed medical terminology during my breaks, and practiced clinical skills whenever I had a spare moment. I lived in the cheapest housing I could find, shared a cramped apartment with 3 other students, and ate rice and beans more nights than I care to remember because they were filling and cost almost nothing. I watched Amanda's social media posts showing her sorority formals, her spring break trips, and her casual brunches at trendy restaurants, all funded by our parents while I was calculating whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries that month. My parents visited Amanda regularly during her college years, making the hour drive to Tempe several times a month to take her out to dinner, or bring her care packages filled with her favorite snacks and toiletries. They attended her sorority events, cheered at her intramural sports games, and made sure she knew they were proud of her and invested in her college experience. During my 4 years at the University of Arizona, 2 hours south in Tucson, they visited me exactly 3 times. Each visit was brief and felt obligatory, squeezed in when they happened to be driving through the area for other reasons. They never asked about my classes, my clinical rotations, or my plans for after graduation. The message was clear and consistent. Amanda's life was interesting and worth their time and attention. Mine was not. I graduated with my Bachelor of Science in Nursing and passed my licensing exam on the first attempt. I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud that I had navigated a demanding program while working and managing my finances with minimal support. I thought perhaps my parents would finally recognize my achievement and acknowledge the effort it had required. I imagined them attending my graduation, taking me out to celebrate, telling me they were proud of the woman I had become. The reality was predictably disappointing. My mother said they could not attend my graduation ceremony because it fell on the same weekend as one of Amanda's sorority events, and they had already committed to being there. She suggested I send them photos and said we could go to dinner sometime to celebrate, a vague promise that never materialized into an actual plan. I walked across that stage, received my diploma, and sat in the audience afterward watching other graduates embrace their families while I smiled for a selfie I took alone and tried to convince myself that I did not need their validation to feel successful. I started my career as a registered nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, working in the medical surgical unit. The hours were long and the work was demanding, but I loved it. I loved the problem-solving aspect of nursing, The way each patient presented a unique puzzle of symptoms and needs that required both clinical knowledge and intuitive understanding. I loved the moments of genuine connection with patients and their families, the privilege of being present during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. I loved feeling competent and needed, valuable in a way I had never felt in my family. I met Robert during my second year as a nurse. He was a physical therapist at the same hospital, and we kept running into each other while rounding on mutual patients. He was kind and funny with an easygoing confidence that put people at ease. He noticed things about me that my family never had, appreciated my dry sense of humor and my tendency to overthink problems until I found the best solution. He made me feel seen in a way I had not experienced before, like I was someone worth paying attention to and understanding deeply. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden. It was exactly what I wanted, intimate and beautiful without the stress and expense of a large wedding. My parents attended but spent most of the reception talking about Amanda's recent promotion at the marketing firm where she worked. They left early, explaining that they had a long drive home and wanted to avoid traffic, missing the sunset toast that Robert and I had specifically planned as the highlight of the evening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amanda had gotten married the year before in an elaborate ceremony at a resort in Sedona. My parents had paid for everything, including the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, and Amanda's designer wedding dress. The event had cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000, a sum my mother mentioned frequently in the months leading up to the wedding, always in the context of how much they loved Amanda and wanted to give her the perfect day. When I got engaged, I never even considered asking them to contribute to my wedding. I knew what the answer would be, and I preferred to plan something I could afford rather than ask for help that would come with strings attached or not come at all. Robert and I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Phoenix, a 3-bedroom ranch that needed some cosmetic updates but had good bones and was within our budget. We painted walls, refinished floors, and slowly made it into a home that reflected both of us. A year after we got married, I got pregnant. We were thrilled and terrified in equal measure, excited about becoming parents but aware of the enormous responsibility we were taking on. My pregnancy was unremarkable from a medical standpoint, textbook normal with none of the complications I had seen in my patients. Emotionally, it was more complex. I found myself thinking constantly about the kind of mother I wanted to be, the kind of childhood I wanted to give my child. I was determined not to replicate the favoritism and conditional love that had characterized my own upbringing. I wanted my child to feel valued and cherished, to know without question that they were wanted and important. When my son Caleb was born, I felt something shift inside me. Holding him for the first time, seeing his tiny perfect face and feeling the weight of him in my arms, I understood love in a way I had not fully grasped before. This was unconditional love, fierce and protective and all-encompassing. I would have done anything for him, sacrificed anything to ensure his happiness and well-being. I looked at this tiny person who was completely dependent on me, and felt the full weight of responsibility and privilege that came with being his mother. My parents visited when Caleb was a week old. They stayed for less than an hour, held him briefly, and left. My mother commented that he looked like Robert's side of the family, which somehow felt like a criticism even though it was factually accurate. They did not visit again for 2 months, and when they did, it was only because they were in the area visiting Amanda, who lived 20 minutes away from us. Amanda had her first child, a daughter named Sophie, when Caleb was 6 months old. The difference in my parents' response was stark and immediate. They visited Amanda in the hospital the day Sophie was born and returned every day that week. They set up a meal delivery service to ensure Amanda had healthy food without having to cook. They hired a cleaning service to come to her house twice a week for the first month. They bought an expensive stroller, a designer diaper bag, and what seemed like an endless supply of adorable outfits in every size. When I had mentioned before Caleb's birth that I was researching strollers and trying to decide which one to buy, my mother had suggested I check consignment shops or online marketplaces where I could find used ones for less money. When Amanda mentioned she was researching strollers, my mother took her shopping and bought her the top-of-the-line model she wanted without hesitation. The stroller cost nearly $800. I tried not to compare, Tried not to keep a mental ledger of all the ways my parents showed up for Amanda while remaining largely absent from my life. But it was impossible not to notice, impossible not to feel the familiar ache of being treated as less important, less deserving of their time and resources and love. I focused on my own family, on Robert and Caleb and the life we were building together. I told myself that I did not need my parents' approval or support, that I was better off without the strings that inevitably came attached to their help. Caleb grew into a bright, curious toddler with Robert's easygoing temperament and my tendency to observe carefully before jumping into new situations. He loved books and building blocks, animals and music. He was cautious around new people but warmed up quickly once he felt safe. He called me mama and reached for me when he was tired or scared or hurt, and every time he did, I felt that fierce protective love surge through me again. As his 4th birthday approached, I started planning a small party. Nothing elaborate, just family and a few of his friends from the neighborhood playgroup we attended. I planned to have it at our house, set up some simple games in the backyard and make a cake myself. It would be low-key and age-appropriate, exactly the kind of celebration that a 4-year-old would enjoy without being overwhelmed. I mentioned the party to my mother during one of our infrequent phone calls, more out of obligation than any real expectation that she would be involved or helpful. I told her the date and said she and my father were of course invited if they wanted to come. I did not ask for help or contributions because I had learned years ago not to expect anything from them. What I did not anticipate was what would happen as Caleb's 5th birthday approached the following year. An event that would finally force me to confront the reality of my relationship with my parents and make a decision about what role, if any, they would have in my life and my son's life going forward. Caleb turned 4. And his party was exactly what I had envisioned. Simple, joyful, focused on him and what he enjoyed. My parents attended but left early, explaining they had other commitments. Amanda did not come at all, texting the morning of the party to say that Sophie was fussy, and she did not think she could make it work. I saw on her social media later that evening that she had gone to brunch with friends. Sophie apparently recovered enough to be out in public when it suited Amanda's plans. The year between Caleb's 4th and 5th birthdays passed in the usual rhythm of work and parenting and maintaining a household. Robert and I both worked full-time, juggling schedules and childcare, and the constant low-level exhaustion that comes with raising a young child. We were happy though. Our life was not glamorous or particularly exciting, but it was ours and it was built on genuine partnership and shared values. As Caleb's 5th birthday approached, I started planning again. This time I wanted to do something a bit more special since 5 felt like a milestone, the transition from toddler to actual kid. Caleb had become obsessed with dinosaurs, able to name dozens of species and recite facts about their habitats and diets. I decided to plan a dinosaur-themed party at a local park that had a paleontology exhibit. I would invite his preschool class, set up dinosaur games and activities, and order a custom cake decorated to look like an archaeological dig site. I created a budget for the party, calculating costs for venue rental, food, decorations, and the cake. It was more than I had spent on his previous birthdays but still reasonable and well within what Robert and I could afford. I was excited about giving Caleb a celebration that reflected his interests and let him share his passion for dinosaurs with his friends. 3 weeks before the party, I received a text message from my mother. The message was brief and to the point, typical of her communication style when she was delivering information she knew I would not like. Diana, I wanted to let you know that your father and I will not be able to contribute anything to Caleb's birthday party this year. Money is very tight right now and we simply cannot afford it. I hope you understand. I stared at the message, reading it multiple times as I tried to process both the content and the assumption underlying it. I had not asked my parents for money. I had not even told them yet that I was planning a party or what it might involve. The fact that my mother was preemptively telling me they could not contribute suggested she assumed I would ask, or perhaps that she thought they should offer but wanted to head off any expectation before it could form. I typed out a response, keeping my tone neutral and pleasant. No worries, Mom. I was not expecting you to contribute. Robert and I have it covered. Hope you and Dad are doing well. Her response came quickly. Oh good. I am glad you are not upset. Things have just been very expensive lately and we need to watch our spending carefully. I did not respond further. I set my phone down and tried to shake off the familiar feeling of being treated as a burden or an afterthought. My parents had never contributed to Caleb's previous birthdays, so this message was not actually informing me of any change in their behavior. It was performative, a way for my mother to position herself as someone who would help if only circumstances allowed, someone who cared but was constrained by practical realities beyond her control. What bothered me more than the message itself was the assumption that I would need or expect their help. Did they think I was incapable of providing for my own child? Did they think so little of my financial stability or planning abilities that they assumed I would be counting on them to fund a birthday party? The implication felt insulting, one more way of positioning me as less capable and less successful than Amanda, who presumably never had to worry about affording things for Sophie because our parents were always ready to step in and cover whatever she needed. I pushed the thoughts aside and continued with my planning. I booked the venue, ordered invitations, and started gathering supplies for the games and activities I had designed. Caleb was getting more excited as the date approached, talking constantly about which of his friends would come, and whether we might see any real dinosaur bones at the paleontology exhibit. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting caught up in his joy rather than dwelling on my mother's message, or the deeper patterns it represented. 3 days after receiving my mother's text about not being able to afford contributing to the party, I had a rare afternoon off work. I needed to pick up some items for the party, and decided to go to a shopping area on the north side of Phoenix that had both a party supply store and a bakery where I wanted to order Caleb's cake. It was a beautiful Arizona afternoon, warm but not yet brutally hot, the kind of weather that made me remember why people chose to live in the desert despite the challenging summers. I parked and walked toward the party supply store, mentally reviewing my list and calculating how much time I had before I needed to pick Caleb up from preschool. As I approached the entrance, I noticed 2 women walking out of the resort that anchored the shopping center, an upscale property that catered to wealthy tourists and locals celebrating special occasions. The women were carrying shopping bags from the luxury boutique inside the resort, the kind of store where a single item of clothing could cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I would not have paid much attention except that something about one woman's laugh was familiar. I looked more carefully and felt my stomach drop as recognition hit. It was my mother, wearing an expensive-looking outfit I had never seen before and carrying multiple shopping bags with the resort boutique's distinctive logo. She was walking with Amanda, who was also carrying bags and laughing at something my mother had just said. They looked relaxed and happy, clearly enjoying a leisurely shopping trip. I stopped walking, standing frozen on the sidewalk as I watched them. They had not seen me yet, too absorbed in their conversation to notice their surroundings. I heard fragments of what they were saying as they got closer, something about spa packages and whether to book them for the following weekend or the weekend after. My mother was saying that the weekend after would work better because Amanda had that work event the first weekend and would be too tired to really enjoy the spa. Amanda agreed, saying she wanted to be able to fully relax and take advantage of all the treatments they were booking. She mentioned something about a hot stone massage and a facial that was supposed to be absolutely amazing. They were 10 feet away from me when my mother finally looked up and saw me standing there. Her expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like guilt before settling into a forced brightness that did not reach her eyes. "Diana, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice artificially cheerful. I could have said many things in that moment. I could have asked her the same question. I could have pointed out the obvious disconnect between her text message 3 days earlier about money being tight and the hundreds of dollars in shopping bags she was currently carrying. I could have demanded an explanation or confronted her directly about the lie she had told me. Instead, I heard myself say in a calm, almost detached voice, "Just running some errands. I see you two are having a nice day." Amanda jumped in, apparently oblivious to any tension. "We are having the best time. Mom took me shopping and we are booking spa packages for next weekend. You should totally join us, Diana. It would be so fun to have a girls' day." The invitation was empty and we all knew it. Amanda had never invited me to anything she and my mother did together, and she was not sincerely inviting me now. She was performing sisterly inclusion for an audience of one, trying to smooth over an awkward encounter with false enthusiasm. I smiled politely. "That sounds nice, but I have a lot going on with Caleb's birthday party coming up. I need to get going actually. I have to pick him up from preschool soon." My mother's expression shifted slightly at the mention of the birthday party. "Oh yes, how is the planning going?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was making polite conversation rather than expressing genuine interest. "It is going well. I have everything organized." I kept my voice neutral and pleasant, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much this encounter had affected me. We stood there for another awkward moment before I excused myself and walked toward the party supply store. I did not look back, but I could feel them watching me. I heard Amanda say something I could not quite make out and my mother's murmured response before the sound of their voices faded as they walked toward the parking lot. I walked into the party supply store and stood in the dinosaur decorations aisle, staring at plastic pterodactyls and not really seeing them. My hands were shaking and I felt a mixture of emotions so intense and tangled that I could not immediately identify all the components. Anger certainly, hurt, betrayal, but also something else, something that felt almost like relief. Because in that moment, watching my mother carry shopping bags worth hundreds of dollars just days after texting me that money was too tight to contribute anything to her grandson's birthday, I finally had undeniable proof of what I had always known but tried to rationalize away. My mother had not told me she could not afford to help with Caleb's party because money was genuinely tight. She had told me that because she did not want to help, because spending money on me or my child was not a priority for her, because she preferred to invest her resources in Amanda and always had. The lie was not about the money. It was about what the lie revealed about how she saw me and valued me. She had not even bothered to come up with a plausible excuse or to avoid situations where I might discover the truth. She had simply assumed I would accept her explanation without question, that I would not challenge her or demand better treatment. Standing in that party supply store, surrounded by cheerful decorations for children's celebrations, I made a decision. I was done accepting less than I deserved. I was done making excuses for my parents' behavior, and trying to convince myself that their favoritism was not as extreme as it appeared. I was done protecting their feelings and maintaining a relationship that brought me nothing but pain. More importantly, I was done allowing them to treat my son as less important than his cousin. Done letting Caleb grow up watching his grandparents shower Sophie with attention and gifts while barely acknowledging his existence. He deserved better, and it was my responsibility as his mother to protect him from the kind of emotional damage that comes from knowing you are not valued by people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I collected the party supplies I needed, ordered Caleb's cake from the bakery, and drove to pick him up from preschool. He ran to me when I arrived, excited to tell me about the art project he had made and the story his teacher had read about a T-Rex who was afraid of the dark. I listened to his chatter and felt that fierce protective love again, stronger than ever. Whatever happened next with my parents, whatever consequences came from the decision I had made, I would make sure Caleb knew he was cherished and valued and important. That evening, after Caleb was in bed, I told Robert about the encounter at the shopping center. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively more angry as I described my mother's shopping bags and the spa packages they were planning. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I am sorry, Diana. I know you have always hoped things would be different with them, but maybe it is time to accept that they are not going to change and decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have with people who treat you this way." He was right and I knew it. The question was not whether my parents would change. They had spent my entire life demonstrating exactly who they were and what I could expect from them. The question was what I was going to do about it, how I was going to move forward with this new clarity about the reality of our relationship. I spent the next 2 weeks finalizing party preparations and thinking about boundaries, consequences, and what it meant to protect yourself and your child from people who claim to love you, but whose actions told a different story. Caleb's 5th birthday party was approaching, and it would mark not just his milestone but mine as well. The moment I finally stopped accepting crumbs from people who gave others entire feasts and started demanding the respect and treatment I deserved. The 2 weeks following my encounter with my mother at the shopping center passed in a strange state of heightened awareness. I moved through my daily routines of work, parenting, and household management, while simultaneously observing my family dynamics with new clarity. It was as though I had been looking at my life through a clouded lens for 34 years, and someone had suddenly wiped it clean, revealing details and patterns I had trained myself not to see. I did not immediately confront my mother about the lie. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to demand an explanation for why she had claimed poverty while simultaneously spending freely on Amanda. But a deeper, more strategic part of me recognized that confrontation without a clear plan would likely result in the same outcome it always had. My mother denying any wrongdoing, twisting the situation to make me seem unreasonable, and ultimately making me feel guilty for questioning her behavior. Instead, I began documenting. I started keeping a private record of interactions with my parents, noting the dates and content of phone calls, text messages, and in-person encounters. I paid closer attention to Amanda's social media posts, which she updated frequently with photos of her life, her daughter, and her activities. The posts provided a running chronicle of my parents' involvement in her life, their regular visits, the gifts they gave Sophie, the outings they funded. Within just those 2 weeks, the documentation revealed a pattern that would have been easy to dismiss as coincidence if viewed in isolation but became undeniable when examined collectively. My mother texted me twice during that period, both times with brief, perfunctory messages asking how Caleb was doing. When I responded with details about his current interests or something funny he had said, she replied with single-word responses or simple emojis. The conversations died quickly, her lack of genuine interest apparent in every exchange. During that same period, Amanda posted photos of my parents at Sophie's preschool performance, at a weekend breakfast outing where Sophie wore a new dress my mother had apparently bought for her, and at a children's museum where my father was captured mid-laugh while helping Sophie complete an interactive exhibit. The captions were effusive with gratitude and love, thanking Mom and Dad for being the most amazing grandparents and making every moment special. I felt the familiar ache of exclusion, but this time it was accompanied by something new: clarity. This was not a matter of my parents being busy or stretched thin or going through a difficult financial period that limited their ability to be involved in both grandchildren's lives equally. This was active choice. They chose to show up for Amanda and Sophie. They chose to invest their time, money, and emotional energy in that relationship. And they chose not to do the same for Caleb and me. Robert noticed the change in my demeanor. I had always been relatively quiet about my family dynamics, not because he was unsympathetic but because I felt ashamed of needing to complain about problems that seemed petty when stated aloud. How could I explain to my husband, who came from a warm, demonstratively loving family, that my parents' failure to attend my son's preschool events or remember his favorite foods felt like a profound rejection? How could I make him understand the cumulative weight of a lifetime of small dismissals and inequalities? But now, with my new commitment to honesty and clarity, I started sharing more. I showed him the text exchanges with my mother, and contrasted them with Amanda's social media posts, documenting our parents' active involvement in Sophie's life. I explained the lie about not being able to afford contributing to Caleb's birthday, and the shopping trip I had witnessed days later. I walked him through years of disparate treatment, giving him context he had only partially understood before. Robert's response was immediate and unequivocal. "This is not okay, Diana. This has never been okay. I know you have spent your whole life trying to rationalize their behavior and make excuses for them, but you need to see this for what it is. They are choosing to treat you and Caleb as less important than Amanda and Sophie. That is not about finances or busy schedules or any of the explanations they have given you over the years. It is about priorities and values, and their priorities and values are clear." Hearing him state the truth so plainly, without hedging or softening, was both painful and liberating. I had spent so many years trying to be understanding, trying to see things from my parents' perspective, trying to convince myself that I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. Having Robert validate my experience and confirm that their treatment was genuinely wrong gave me permission to trust my own perceptions and feelings. We talked late into the night about what boundaries might look like, what consequences might be appropriate, and how to protect Caleb from the emotional damage of growing up knowing his grandparents valued him less than his cousin. Robert suggested that perhaps we needed to significantly reduce contact with my parents, to stop putting energy into a relationship that brought nothing but pain and disappointment. I was not ready to make that decision yet, but I appreciated that he was willing to support whatever choice I made. At work, I found myself thinking about family dynamics in new ways. As a nurse, I regularly witness families navigating difficult situations, making hard decisions about medical care, and sometimes revealing long-standing tensions and dysfunctions under the stress of illness or crisis. I had always maintained professional distance, observing these dynamics without applying the lessons to my own life. Now I found myself drawing parallels, recognizing patterns I had seen in troubled families and understanding that my own family exhibited many of the same warning signs. One afternoon, I was caring for an elderly patient whose two adult children were clearly engaged in a power struggle over their mother's care. The favored son made all the decisions and spoke on behalf of the family, while the daughter sat quietly in the corner, her suggestions dismissed or ignored. I watched the daughter's face as her brother overrode her attempt to share information about their mother's medication preferences, saw the flash of hurt and resignation that she tried to hide. I recognized that expression because I had seen it in my own mirror countless times. During a quiet moment, the daughter stepped out of the room and I found her in the hallway, composing herself. I should not have said anything, should have maintained professional boundaries, but something about her situation resonated so deeply with my own that I felt compelled to speak. "I see you," I told her quietly. "I see that you care about your mother and want what is best for her. Your input matters, even if your brother does not always make space for it." She looked at me with surprise that quickly dissolved into tears. "Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. I have spent my entire life being invisible in my family, being treated like my opinions and feelings do not matter. I keep showing up and trying because she is my mother, but sometimes I wonder why I bother when nothing I do is ever enough." Her words could have been my own. I offered what comfort I could, validated her experience, and encouraged her to set boundaries that protected her own well-being, even as she cared for her mother. After she returned to the room, I stood in the hallway thinking about the advice I had just given. I was good at seeing clearly when it came to other people's dysfunctional family dynamics, good at recognizing when someone was being treated poorly and needed to establish healthier boundaries. Why was it so difficult to apply that same clarity to my own situation? The answer, I realized, was hope. I kept hoping that my parents would change, that something would shift and they would suddenly see me and value me the way they saw and valued Amanda. I kept hoping that if I just tried hard enough, if I was understanding enough and undemanding enough, they would eventually recognize my worth and treat me accordingly. But hope, I was beginning to understand, could be a form of self-deception when it prevented you from seeing reality clearly and responding appropriately. As Caleb's birthday approached, I threw myself into the final preparations with fierce determination. This party would be perfect, not because I needed to prove anything to my parents, but because Caleb deserved a celebration that reflected how much he was loved and valued. I wanted him to have memories of feeling special and important, of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him and wanted to celebrate who he was. I finalized the guest list, confirmed RSVPs from his preschool classmates, and coordinated with the parents about drop-off and pickup times. I assembled goodie bags filled with small dinosaur toys and fossil excavation kits. I created a scavenger hunt where children would search for hidden dinosaur eggs throughout the park. I practiced decorating techniques so that I could help the bakery understand exactly how I wanted Caleb's cake to look. My mother called 5 days before the party. The call came in the early evening, during that chaotic hour when I was trying to prepare dinner while Caleb played nearby and Robert was stuck in traffic on his way home from work. I saw her name on the caller ID and briefly considered not answering, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Mom," I said, wedging the phone between my shoulder and ear while I stirred pasta on the stove. "Diana, hello. I wanted to check in about Caleb's birthday party. What time should your father and I arrive?" The question was so casually stated, so absent of any acknowledgement of our previous conversation or the shopping trip I had witnessed, that I felt momentarily disoriented. Did she genuinely not remember telling me they could not afford to contribute? Did she think I had somehow missed seeing her at the resort with Amanda? Or was she simply counting on me to be too polite or conflict-averse to mention the obvious contradiction? "The party starts at 2 o'clock at Saguaro Park," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "There is a shelter we have reserved near the paleontology exhibit. And what can we bring?" She asked this as though it were a normal question, as though she had not sent me a text message just weeks earlier claiming financial hardship. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and insistent. "You told me you could not afford to contribute anything," I said, surprised by my own directness. "So I planned accordingly. You do not need to bring anything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, of course we want to bring something for our grandson's birthday, Diana. Do not be ridiculous. We can certainly manage a gift and maybe a side dish or something for the adults to eat. The casual dismissal of her previous message, the implication that I was being unreasonable for taking her at her word, ignited something in me. I set down the spoon I was holding and gave the conversation my full attention. Mom, 3 weeks ago you texted me that money was tight, and you could not afford to contribute anything to Caleb's party. I told you that was fine and I had it covered. Nothing has changed on my end. If you want to come to the party, you are welcome, but I am not expecting anything from you. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her recalibrating, trying to decide how to respond to my unexpected pushback. Diana, I do not appreciate your tone. Your father and I are trying to be involved grandparents and you are making it very difficult. We want to bring a gift for Caleb. Why are you being so hostile about that? The reframing was masterful. Suddenly I was the problem. The hostile daughter making things difficult rather than the mother who had lied and been caught. I recognized the manipulation tactic because I had experienced it countless times before, but recognizing it did not make it less effective at inducing guilt and self-doubt. I am not being hostile, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. I am simply clarifying that I took you at your word when you said you could not afford to contribute, and I made plans accordingly. If you choose to bring a gift, that is your decision. I am just saying it is not expected or required. Fine, she said, her voice tight with poorly suppressed anger. We will see you at 2 o'clock. I need to go now. Your father is calling me. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling the familiar cocktail of emotions that followed most interactions with my mother. Frustration, guilt, anger, and a deep weariness that came from constantly navigating her manipulations and reframings. Robert arrived home 20 minutes later and found me still cooking dinner but moving mechanically, my mind clearly elsewhere. After Caleb was settled with his food, Robert and I talked in the kitchen while cleaning up. She is already trying to make me feel guilty, I told him, recounting the phone conversation. She completely ignored the fact that she lied about not being able to afford anything, and when I brought it up, she acted like I was being unreasonable and hostile for even mentioning it. Then she played the victim, saying I was making it difficult for them to be involved grandparents. Robert shook his head with visible frustration. That is what manipulative people do, Diana. They lie, get caught, and then somehow make you feel bad for noticing the lie. You did nothing wrong. You took her at her word and planned accordingly. The fact that she is now upset about that is her problem, not yours. I know you are right, I said. But it still gets to me. I still feel guilty, like maybe I should have just accepted her offer to bring something and not said anything about the contradiction. Like maybe I am making too big a deal out of this. Robert moved closer and took my hands in his. Listen to me. You are not making too big a deal out of this. Your mother lied to you about her financial situation while actively spending money on your sister. That is a significant betrayal, and the fact that she will not even acknowledge it or apologize makes it worse. You have every right to be upset, and to set boundaries about how you want to be treated. His words helped, but I knew the guilt would linger. That was the insidious thing about growing up with this kind of treatment. You internalize the message that your needs and feelings were not as important as other people's, that you were being difficult or demanding when you expected basic honesty and respect. Even when you intellectually understood that you deserved better, the emotional programming remained, whispering that you were the problem. The final days before the party passed in a blur of work shifts and last-minute preparations. I picked up the cake from the bakery and nearly cried when I saw how perfectly they had executed my vision. The top layer was decorated to look like layers of sedimentary rock, and small plastic dinosaur bones peeked out from the frosting as though they were being excavated. Caleb's name was written in frosting designed to look like ancient cave paintings. It was exactly what I had imagined. A cake that honored his passion and would make him feel truly seen and celebrated. I decorated the park shelter the evening before the party, stringing up inflatable dinosaurs and setting up activity stations for the various games I had planned. Robert helped me carry supplies and set up tables, and we worked together in comfortable silence. Both of us invested in making this day special for our son. As we worked, I thought about what this party represented beyond just a 5th birthday celebration. It represented my commitment to giving Caleb what I had never had. The experience of being valued and celebrated, of knowing without question that he was important and loved. It represented my determination to break the cycle of favoritism and conditional love, that had characterized my childhood. And it represented a turning point in my relationship with my parents, a moment when I was choosing to prioritize my son's well-being and my own dignity over the desperate hope that they would somehow transform into the parents I had always wanted them to be. I did not know yet exactly what boundaries I would establish or what consequences I would enforce. I did not know whether my parents would attend the party or what would happen if they did. But I knew that something fundamental had shifted inside me. I was done accepting less than I deserved. I was done making excuses for people who repeatedly demonstrated through their actions that I was not a priority. And I was done allowing my son to be collateral damage in my parents' ongoing favoritism of Amanda and her family. The night before the party, I tucked Caleb into bed and sat with him in the darkened room, listening to him talk excitedly about the next day. He was most excited about the fossil excavation activity, where each child would receive a block embedded with replica fossils they could carefully chip away to discover. He wondered aloud which of his friends would find the most fossils and whether there might be a T-Rex tooth in his block. I stroked his hair and felt that fierce protective love again, stronger than ever. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever drama or tension emerged from my parents' attendance, I would make sure Caleb felt celebrated and important. He would remember his 5th birthday as a day when he was the center of attention for all the right reasons, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him and wanted to share in his joy. As I kissed him goodnight and turned out the light, I made a silent promise to both of us. I would protect him from the kind of emotional damage I had experienced. I would make sure he grew up knowing his worth was not contingent on other people's recognition or approval. And I would model for him what it looked like to set boundaries and demand respect, even when that meant difficult confrontations with people you loved. The morning of the party dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect Arizona day that made you grateful to live in the desert. I woke early and lay in bed for a few moments, mentally reviewing my preparations and steeling myself for whatever the day might bring. Then I got up, made coffee, and started getting ready to give my son the birthday celebration he deserved. The morning of Caleb's 5th birthday party moved with the peculiar quality of significant days, where time seemed simultaneously to accelerate and slow down depending on which tasks demanded attention. I moved through the house with focused efficiency, packing the car with supplies I had carefully organized the night before. Coolers filled with juice boxes and water bottles. Bins containing party favors and activity materials. The precious cake secured in its specialized carrier. Caleb's excitement vibrated through every room, his voice rising in pitch as he asked repeatedly whether it was time to leave yet. Robert managed our son's energy while I made final preparations, engaging him in conversation about which dinosaurs might appear at the party, and whether any of his friends knew as much about paleontology as he did. I could hear their conversation from the kitchen where I was packing sandwiches and fruit, and I felt grateful for my husband's patient presence and his genuine engagement with our son's interests. We arrived at Saguaro Park 90 minutes before the party's scheduled start time. The shelter I had reserved sat in a shaded area near the paleontology exhibit, positioned perfectly to allow children to explore the outdoor displays before or after the structured activities. The park was relatively empty at this early hour, just a few joggers on the trails and one family playing near the distant playground equipment. Robert and I worked together to transform the shelter into a dinosaur wonderland. We hung inflatable pterodactyls from the ceiling beams and draped green streamers to create a jungle canopy effect. We set up activity stations for the fossil excavation, the scavenger hunt, and a dinosaur bone puzzle that would require collaborative assembly. We arranged tables with dinosaur-themed tablecloths, and positioned the centerpieces I had created using small plastic dinosaurs emerging from nests of shredded paper grass. Caleb helped with age-appropriate tasks, placing party favors at each seat, and arranging the small dinosaur figures I had purchased to hide throughout the area for the scavenger hunt. His investment in the preparations made the event feel collaborative rather than something being done for him, and I appreciated how the process was teaching him that celebrations required work and planning rather than simply appearing fully formed. By 1:30 in the afternoon, everything was ready. The shelter looked festive and inviting. The activity stations were organized and supplied. The cake sat in its place of honor on a separate table, protected from the Arizona sun by careful positioning in the deepest shade. I looked around at what we had created and felt satisfaction that had nothing to do with my parents or their approval. This was good work, done with love and care for a child who deserved to feel special. The guests began arriving shortly before 2 o'clock. Preschool classmates tumbled out of their parents' cars, excited and loud in the way that 5-year-olds gather energy from being in groups. I greeted each family, directed them toward the shelter, and watched as Caleb's face lit up with each new arrival. His best friend Marcus came running up and the two boys immediately began talking over each other about dinosaurs, their words colliding in enthusiastic chaos that made the nearby parents smile. By 10 minutes past 2, all of the invited children had arrived except for Sophie, my niece, whose attendance I had not actually expected despite having sent Amanda an invitation out of obligation. The children were engaged in the scavenger hunt, racing around the designated area searching for hidden dinosaur eggs, while their parents stood in conversational clusters near the shelter. The atmosphere was joyful and relaxed, exactly what I had hoped to create. My parents had not arrived. I told myself I did not care, that their absence was predictable and perhaps even preferable given the tension of our recent phone conversation. But I felt the familiar ache of disappointment anyway, the childish hurt of being deemed unimportant yet again. I pushed the feeling aside and focused on the children, on making sure everyone was included in the activities, and that Caleb was having the experience he deserved. At 2:20, just as I was preparing to transition the group from the scavenger hunt to the fossil excavation activity, I saw my parents' car pulling into the parking area. My mother emerged first, wearing what was clearly a new outfit that probably cost more than my entire party budget. My father followed, and then the back doors opened to reveal Amanda, Sophie, and Amanda's husband Derek, whose presence I had not anticipated at all. They approached as a group, my mother carrying a large gift bag covered in generic birthday patterns, my father holding a grocery store bouquet of flowers that looked like a last-minute purchase, and Amanda pushing Sophie in a stroller despite the fact that at nearly 4 years old, Sophie was perfectly capable of walking. The stroller was a status symbol, one of those high-end European models that cost more than a month of my mortgage payments. "Diana," my mother called out as they got closer, her voice projecting a warmth that felt performative. "We made it." Traffic was terrible coming from Scottsdale. It was a 25-minute drive from their house to the park, and I knew the traffic excuse was manufactured to explain their lateness without having to admit they had simply not prioritized arriving on time. I smiled politely and greeted them, then directed them toward the shelter where other adults were gathering. Caleb noticed his grandparents' arrival and ran over, his face bright with uncomplicated happiness at seeing family members he rarely saw. "Grandma, Grandpa, you came to my dinosaur party," he exclaimed, reaching up for a hug. My mother bent down and gave him a brief, careful embrace that seemed designed not to wrinkle her outfit. "Of course we came, sweetheart. Happy birthday. We brought you a present." She handed him the gift bag and I watched his small hands struggle with the tissue paper stuffed inside. He pulled out a toy that I recognized immediately as something generic and uninspired, the kind of item you grab at a big box store when you need a gift, but have not put any thought into what the recipient might actually enjoy. It was a basic action figure from a popular movie franchise that Caleb had never expressed interest in. The toy was fine, perfectly adequate, but it bore no relationship to his actual interests or personality. "Thank you," Caleb said with the politeness Robert and I had instilled in him, though I could see in his eyes that he was already losing interest in the gift. My father handed me the flowers with an awkward smile. "These are for you, Diana. For hosting." I accepted them with thanks and set them aside, wondering if my parents genuinely did not see the difference between their minimal, thoughtless gifts for Caleb and the expensive, carefully selected presents they regularly gave Sophie. Amanda had posted photos just last month of the elaborate dollhouse my parents had purchased for Sophie's half-birthday, a structure so large and detailed that it had required professional assembly. Amanda positioned herself near the shelter and began taking photos, her phone clicking constantly as she documented the decorations and setup. She called Sophie over and started staging photos of her daughter near the dinosaur decorations, directing her to pose and smile as though this were Sophie's party rather than Caleb's. "These decorations are so cute, Diana," Amanda said, her tone suggesting surprise that I had been capable of creating something attractive. "Very Pinterest-worthy. You must have spent so much time on all this." The comment felt like a subtle dig, an implication that I had perhaps overinvested in a child's birthday party, that my effort was excessive or try-hard, rather than a natural expression of love for my son. I refused to take the bait. Caleb loves dinosaurs, so I wanted to create something special for him, I said simply. My mother was surveying the food table with an expression I had learned to read over decades of experience. It was the look she wore when she was finding things to criticize but trying to appear supportive. Diana, you did not need to go to all this trouble. Children this age are happy with simple celebrations. Hot dogs and a grocery store cake would have been perfectly fine. The comment was designed to make me feel foolish for my effort, while simultaneously positioning herself as more knowledgeable about appropriate parenting choices. I felt Robert move closer to me, a physical show of support and solidarity. I wanted Caleb to have a special celebration for his 5th birthday, I said, keeping my voice even. This is what felt right for our family. Before my mother could respond, one of the other parents called out that the children were ready for the next activity. I excused myself and moved toward the fossil excavation station, grateful for the interruption and the opportunity to focus on something other than my family's dynamics. The fossil excavation was the hit I had anticipated. Each child received a plaster block embedded with replica fossils, and a set of small tools to carefully chip away the material and discover what was hidden inside. Caleb and his friends approached the task with serious concentration, their small faces intense with focus as they worked to free tiny dinosaur bones and teeth from the plaster. I moved among them, offering encouragement and assistance when tools slipped or frustration mounted. I took photos of their discoveries and their delighted faces when a particularly good fossil emerged. I was completely absorbed in the activity, and in watching Caleb's joy when I became aware of a conversation happening near the shelter behind me. Amanda's voice carried clearly across the space, pitched at a volume that ensured it would be overheard. I just think it is interesting that Diana can afford to throw such an elaborate party when she was complaining about money being tight. Remember when she said she could not afford to contribute to Sophie's dance recital costumes last year? I froze, my hand stilling on the plaster block I was helping a child excavate. The statement was a complete fabrication. I had never been asked to contribute to Sophie's dance recital costumes, and had certainly never complained about money being tight. But Amanda was rewriting history for an audience, creating a narrative in which I was simultaneously wasteful with my own spending and stingy when it came to helping family. My mother's voice joined in, quieter but still audible. Well, we all have different priorities, I suppose. Some people prefer to spend money on parties rather than saving for their children's future education. The criticism was sharp and pointed, made more painful by its fundamental unfairness. Robert and I had been contributing to a college savings account for Caleb since before he was born. We had sacrificed and budgeted carefully to ensure we could provide for his future, while still giving him a good childhood in the present. My parents knew this because I had mentioned it during previous conversations, but they were choosing to ignore that knowledge in favor of creating a negative narrative about my financial choices. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and insistent. I could feel other parents glancing toward my family and then away, embarrassed to be overhearing what was clearly a hostile conversation. I wanted to stand up and confront them directly, to call out the lies and the manipulation in front of everyone. But I was acutely aware of Caleb nearby, absorbed in his activity but within earshot. I would not create a scene at his birthday party. I would not let my parents' toxicity contaminate this day that was supposed to be about celebrating him. Instead, I took a deep breath and refocused on the children. I praised discoveries and offered assistance. I maintained an atmosphere of warmth and encouragement at the activity station, even as I processed the betrayal happening yards away. Robert caught my eye from across the space, and I saw in his expression that he had heard the comments as well. His jaw was tight with anger, but he followed my lead, staying focused on the party and the children rather than engaging with my family's provocations. The fossil excavation concluded successfully, and we transitioned to free playtime before cake and singing. The children scattered across the area, some exploring the paleontology exhibit displays, others playing chase games in the open grass, all of them energized and happy. Caleb was in his element, leading a group of friends through the exhibit and sharing facts about different dinosaur species with the confidence of a tour guide. My parents had positioned themselves at a table under the shelter with Amanda, Derek, and Sophie. They were speaking in lower voices now, but I could see my mother gesturing in my direction and Amanda nodding along with whatever was being said. They looked like a unified group, comfortable and connected in their shared perspective on my inadequacy. One of the other mothers approached me, A woman named Jennifer whose son attended preschool with Caleb. This is such a wonderful party, Diana. You can really see how much thought and love went into every detail. Caleb is lucky to have parents who celebrate him so thoughtfully. Her words were kind and genuine, offered without any awareness of the painful contrast they created with my own family's criticism. I thanked her and felt tears threatening at the edges of my eyes. I blinked them back, refusing to cry at my son's birthday party. At 3 o'clock we gathered the children for cake and singing. I lit the candles while Robert helped Caleb into position at the head of the table. The children and parents gathered around and we sang happy birthday in the enthusiastic, slightly off-key way that groups always do. Caleb's face glowed with pleasure as he looked around at all the people celebrating him. When the song ended, he took a deep breath and blew out all 5 candles in one strong exhale, and everyone cheered. I cut the cake and distributed slices while Robert handed out drinks. The children devoured their pieces with the single-minded focus that small children bring to sugar consumption. Parents nibbled more slowly while chatting and watching their kids. It was a moment of pure celebration. Exactly what I had wanted to create. My mother approached me as I was cutting a slice for one of the late-arriving children. "Diana, I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice low and serious. I set down the cake server and turned to face her. "Now is not really a good time, Mom. I am in the middle of serving cake. This will just take a moment." She glanced toward where my father, Amanda, and Derek were sitting with Sophie. "We have been talking and we think you need to hear some honest feedback." The phrase honest feedback was one of my mother's favorites, a way of framing criticism as though it were a gift rather than an attack. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "What feedback is that?" I asked. "We think you are being selfish and short-sighted with how you are raising Caleb. Children do not need elaborate parties and constant entertainment. They need discipline and structure and to learn that the world does not revolve around them. You are setting him up for disappointment later in life when he realizes that not every day will be a celebration." I stared at my mother, processing the breathtaking hypocrisy of what she had just said. This was the same woman who had thrown elaborate parties for Amanda throughout her childhood, who had funded every whim and desire, who had never once suggested that Sophie's frequent celebrations and constant stream of gifts might be excessive or harmful. But somehow my attempt to give Caleb one special birthday party was evidence of poor parenting and harmful indulgence. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice tight with the effort of remaining calm. "But Robert and I are confident in our parenting choices. Caleb is a kind, well-adjusted child who understands that special occasions are different from everyday life. I am comfortable with how we are raising him." My mother's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake, Diana. But I suppose you have always been stubborn and unwilling to accept guidance from people who know better than you do." The casual cruelty of the comment, delivered at my son's birthday party while I was actively serving cake to children, finally pushed me past the point of polite endurance. I set down the cake knife and looked directly at my mother. "I think it would be best if you and Dad left now," I said quietly. "Thank you for coming, but I do not think your presence here is positive or helpful." My mother's eyes widened with shock. "You are kicking us out of your son's birthday party? What kind of daughter does that to her own parents? The kind who is tired of being criticized and undermined at every opportunity. The kind who refuses to let her son witness his grandmother treating his mother with disrespect. You can leave voluntarily, or I can ask you to leave more publicly. Your choice." For a long moment we stood there in silent confrontation. Years of accumulated hurt and anger crystallizing into this single moment of boundary setting. My mother's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cold fury. "Fine," she said. "We will leave. But do not expect us to forget this, Diana. Family should not treat each other this way." She turned and walked back to the table where my father and Amanda were sitting. I watched as she spoke to them in low, urgent tones. I saw Amanda's expression shift to shock and then anger. I saw my father stand up slowly, his face registering confusion and concern. They gathered their things with exaggerated slowness, making sure everyone noticed they were leaving. Amanda made a production of comforting Sophie, who had not been upset until her mother started fussing over her. My father approached me one more time. "Diana, I do not understand what just happened. Your mother is very upset. Can we talk about this calmly?" "Not now, Dad. Please just go. We can talk another time if you want, But right now I need you to leave so I can focus on Caleb's party. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him I was serious. He nodded slowly and returned to where my mother and Amanda were waiting. Together they walked toward the parking lot, my mother's posture rigid with anger, Amanda looking back over her shoulder with an expression of scandalized disbelief. I watched them leave and felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Then I turned back to the party, back to the children eating cake and the parents chatting comfortably, back to Caleb who was showing his friend Marcus how to properly hold a plastic stegosaurus. I picked up the cake knife and resumed serving, and no one except Robert and I seemed to fully register that anything significant had just occurred. The party continued for another hour. The children played games, explored the exhibit, and eventually began to tire in the way that signals the natural end of a successful event. Parents collected their children, thanked me for hosting, and departed with party favors and leftover cake. Caleb accepted their goodbyes with good grace, clearly exhausted but deeply satisfied with how his day had unfolded. As Robert and I packed up the decorations and supplies, loading everything back into our car, I reflected on what had happened. I had set a boundary with my parents for perhaps the first time in my adult life. I had refused to accept their criticism and disrespect, had asked them to leave rather than allowing them to continue poisoning the atmosphere of my son's celebration. It felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly. The drive home from the park occurred in relative silence. Caleb dozed in his car seat, exhausted from the excitement and activity of his party. Robert drove while I sat in the passenger seat processing the events of the afternoon, replaying my confrontation with my mother, and analyzing whether I had handled the situation appropriately. Part of me felt vindicated and empowered by finally establishing a clear boundary. Another part questioned whether I had overreacted, whether I should have found a way to tolerate their behavior for the sake of maintaining family harmony. Robert seemed to sense the direction of my thoughts without me voicing them. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, keeping his eyes on the road. "You gave them multiple opportunities to behave appropriately, and they chose to criticize and undermine you instead. Asking them to leave was the correct response. You protected yourself and you protected Caleb from witnessing disrespect toward his mother." His words helped, but the familiar guilt still churned in my stomach. I had been conditioned since childhood to accommodate my parents' behavior, to absorb their criticism without complaint, to prioritize their feelings over my own needs and boundaries. Breaking that pattern felt simultaneously necessary and transgressive, like violating some fundamental law of family dynamics, even though I intellectually understood that the law itself was unjust. We arrived home and I carried Caleb inside while Robert began unloading the car. Our son woke briefly as I transferred him to his bed, mumbling something about dinosaurs before falling back into deep sleep. I stood in his doorway for a moment watching him, this small person who depended on me to create a childhood better than the one I had experienced. Setting boundaries with my parents was not just about protecting myself. It was about modeling for Caleb what healthy relationships looked like, teaching him through example that he should not accept disrespect or mistreatment from anyone, even family members who claimed to love him. Robert and I spent the evening unpacking party supplies and discussing what would likely come next. We both knew my parents would not simply accept being asked to leave. They would retaliate, probably through a combination of direct confrontation and social manipulation designed to paint me as unreasonable and ungrateful. The question was not whether the retaliation would occur but rather what form it would take and how we would respond. I did not have to wait long for an answer. My phone began ringing at 8:30 that evening, just as Robert and I were finishing the cleanup and settling onto the couch. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The phone rang again immediately. I declined the call again. Over the next hour, my mother called 7 times. I did not answer any of the attempts. The voicemail she left escalated in tone and intensity. The first was relatively controlled, asking me to call her back so we could discuss what had happened and resolve the misunderstanding. By the third voicemail, her voice had taken on the sharp edge I recognized from childhood confrontations. By the 7th, she was openly angry, her words clipping together as she told me I was being childish and manipulative, and that I owed her an apology for the embarrassment I had caused. Text messages began arriving as well. My mother sent several long paragraphs explaining all the ways I had misinterpreted her helpful feedback and blown a minor situation out of proportion. My father sent shorter messages asking me to please call them and talk through whatever had upset me. Amanda's messages were the most hostile, accusing me of ruining a family event and traumatizing Sophie by forcing them to leave abruptly. I showed the messages to Robert, who read through them with growing anger. "They are trying to make you feel crazy," he said. "They are rewriting what actually happened and trying to convince you that your reasonable response to their unreasonable behavior was somehow wrong. This is classic gaslighting, Diana. Do not let them manipulate you into doubting yourself." I knew he was right, but the messages still affected me. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing my experience described in terms that bore no resemblance to reality. My mother characterized her criticism of my parenting as gentle suggestions offered out of loving concern. Amanda described the conversation I had overheard as innocent observations that I had misinterpreted due to my own insecurity. They were creating an alternate version of events where I was the aggressor, and they were innocent victims of my unreasonable hostility. That night I slept poorly, waking repeatedly to check my phone and find new messages waiting. By morning I had received over 30 text messages and 15 missed calls from various family members. Even my Aunt Teresa, who lived in Tucson and whom I had not spoken to in over a year, had somehow been recruited to the cause and sent me a long message about the importance of family forgiveness and not holding grudges against people who only wanted what was best for me. The intervention had clearly been orchestrated. My parents had spent the evening after leaving the party calling extended family members, providing them with their version of events, and encouraging them to contact me with messages designed to make me feel guilty and isolated. It was a familiar tactic, one they had employed before when I had made choices they disapproved of. They were leveraging social pressure and collective family opinion to force me into compliance. Robert found me at the kitchen table the next morning scrolling through messages with mounting anxiety. "Stop reading them," he said firmly, taking the phone from my hands. "You are letting them get into your head. Nothing they are saying changes the reality of what happened or the appropriateness of your response." He was right. But breaking the compulsion to engage with their accusations proved difficult. I kept reaching for my phone, kept feeling the need to defend myself or correct their mischaracterizations. Robert finally suggested I turn off my phone entirely for the day, to give myself space from the constant barrage of manipulative messages. I took his advice and felt immediate relief when the device powered down and the notifications stopped. We spent Sunday as a family, taking Caleb to the science museum he loved, and then to his favorite pizza restaurant for dinner. I focused on being present with my son and husband, on enjoying the simple pleasure of their company without the constant background anxiety of monitoring my phone for hostile messages. Caleb was still riding the happiness of his successful birthday party, chattering about which friends had found the best fossils and whether we could go back to the paleontology exhibit again soon. Watching him, I felt renewed certainty that I had made the right choice in asking my parents to leave. This child deserved to grow up surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated him, who found joy in his interests and took pleasure in his happiness. He deserved grandparents who showed up consistently, who remembered what mattered to him, who treated him as important and valuable. If my parents could not or would not be those grandparents, then perhaps it was better for Caleb to have limited contact with them rather than growing up watching them shower his cousin with attention while treating him as an afterthought. Monday morning arrived and I returned to work at the hospital, grateful for the distraction of patient care and the demands of my nursing responsibilities. I had turned my phone back on but set it to do not disturb mode, allowing calls only from Robert, Caleb's preschool, and the hospital. The restricted notifications created a bubble of peace that allowed me to focus on my job without constant interruption. During my lunch break, I checked the accumulated messages and found the harassment had continued unabated throughout Sunday. My mother had sent another dozen texts alternating between anger and wounded martyrdom. Amanda had posted on social media about the pain of being excluded by family members who should value relationships over petty disagreements. Several relatives I barely knew had sent messages ranging from concern to outright criticism. I also found 3 voicemails from my mother that had been left early Monday morning. I listened to them in the hospital cafeteria, phone pressed to my ear while I picked at a salad I had brought from home. The first voicemail was my mother informing me that she and my father had decided they needed to speak with me in person to resolve this situation properly. The second was her telling me they would be coming to my house that evening at 6 o'clock and expected me to be home to receive them. The third was her warning me not to make this situation worse by refusing to engage with them like a mature adult. The presumption was staggering. My mother had unilaterally decided when and where a conversation would occur, and expected me to comply without question. She had not asked if the timing worked for me, or whether I was ready to have this conversation. She had simply issued a directive and assumed I would fall in line as I always had before. I called Robert immediately. My parents are planning to show up at our house at 6 tonight, I told him. My mother left voicemails this morning announcing it like it was already decided. Robert's response was immediate and unequivocal. They are not coming into our house, Diana. You do not have to see them or talk to them until you are ready. This is your home and you get to decide who is welcome here and when. His certainty helped ground me. He was right. I did not owe my parents immediate access or instant forgiveness simply because they demanded it. I was allowed to take time to process what had happened, to decide what boundaries I needed to establish, and to communicate on my own timeline rather than theirs. I sent my mother a text message that was brief and clear. I received your voicemails. I am not available to meet this evening. When I am ready to have a conversation, I will let you know. Please do not come to my house uninvited. Her response came within seconds. This is ridiculous, Diana. We are your parents. You do not get to shut us out like this. We will be there at 6 whether you like it or not. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Robert along with my response to my mother. If you come to my house uninvited, I will not answer the door. If you refuse to leave, I will call the police for trespassing. I need space right now and I need you to respect that boundary. The rest of my shift at the hospital passed in a state of elevated anxiety. I kept checking my phone during breaks, watching for further escalation. My mother sent several more messages accusing me of being cruel and unreasonable, of punishing them for caring about me, of turning into someone she no longer recognized. Amanda joined in with her own messages about how disappointed she was in my behavior, and how I was tearing the family apart over nothing. I left work at 4:30 and drove home with a knot of tension in my stomach. Robert had arranged to leave his job early as well, and we agreed to present a united front if my parents actually followed through on their threat to show up uninvited. We picked up Caleb from preschool together and arrived home by 5:15, giving us time to prepare dinner and settle in before the 6 o'clock deadline my mother had established. At precisely 6 o'clock, my parents' car pulled into our driveway. I watched through the living room window as my mother and father emerged from the vehicle and walked toward our front door with determined expressions. My mother was carrying what appeared to be a folder or portfolio of some kind. My father looked uncomfortable but resolved, clearly having been convinced by my mother that this confrontation was necessary. The doorbell rang. Robert and I looked at each other and I nodded, confirming I wanted to stick with our plan. We did not answer. The doorbell rang again, a longer press this time. Then came knocking, firm and insistent. My mother's voice carried through the door. Diana, we know you are home. Your car is in the driveway. Stop being childish and open the door so we can talk like adults. I remained silent, sitting on the couch with my hands clasped tightly together. Caleb was in his room playing, blessedly unaware of the confrontation occurring at our front door. Robert stood near the window, watching my parents through a gap in the curtains to monitor their behavior. The knocking continued for several minutes, punctuated by my mother calling my name and demanding I open the door. Then I heard my father's voice, quieter and more placating, suggesting they should leave and try again another day. My mother's response was sharp and dismissive, telling him to stop being weak and let her handle this. After about 10 minutes, the knocking stopped. I watched through the window as my parents walked back to their car. But instead of getting in and leaving, my mother opened the back door and retrieved something. She returned to our porch and I heard the sound of papers being shoved through our mail slot. Then she knocked one more time before returning to the car. We waited until they had driven away before Robert retrieved the papers from the floor near our front door. It was a printed document, multiple pages stapled together, with a cover page that read, Family Intervention, Concerns about Diana's Mental Health and Parenting Decisions. I took the document from Robert's hands with a sense of surreal disbelief. My mother had actually created a formal document outlining her criticisms of my life choices and mental state. I flipped through the pages and felt my anger building with each paragraph. The document was organized into sections with headers like pattern of isolation from family, excessive spending on unnecessary items, concerning behavior toward extended family, and potential impact on child's development. Each section contained bullet points detailing perceived problems with my behavior, all framed in language that made me sound unstable and potentially harmful to my son. Under the isolation section, my mother had listed every family event I had skipped over the past 2 years, characterizing my absences as evidence of antisocial tendencies, rather than reasonable responses to events where I knew I would be ignored or criticized. Under the excessive spending section, she had calculated what she estimated I had spent on Caleb's birthday party, and compared it unfavorably to what she characterized as more appropriate modest celebrations. The section on my behavior toward extended family referenced the birthday party incident, but described it in terms that bore no resemblance to what had actually occurred. According to my mother's account, I had become irrationally angry when they arrived late due to traffic, had accused them of not caring about Caleb without any provocation, and had screamed at them to leave in front of horrified parents and frightened children. The entire narrative was fabricated, a complete rewriting of events designed to make me appear unstable, and them appear victimized. The final section about the potential impact on Caleb's development was the most painful to read. My mother had written that she was deeply concerned about how my need for control and my hostility toward family were creating an unhealthy environment for my son. She worried that I was isolating him from extended family relationships that would be important for his social and emotional development. She suggested that my behavior indicated I might be suffering from postpartum depression or anxiety that had never been properly addressed. The document concluded with a list of demands framed as necessary steps for family healing. I was expected to apologize to everyone I had offended at the birthday party. I was expected to attend family therapy with my parents to address my issues with anger and control. I was expected to commit to attending all future family events without complaint. And I was expected to acknowledge that my parents' involvement in Caleb's life was beneficial and important, and to actively facilitate more frequent contact between him and his grandparents. I set the document down on the coffee table and looked at Robert. She actually made a formal list of everything she thinks is wrong with me, and delivered it to our house like some kind of psychological intervention. Robert picked up the document and read through it himself, his expression darkening with each page. This is abusive, Diana. This is not normal family conflict. This is a calculated attempt to undermine your confidence and make you question your own reality. Everything in here is either a distortion or an outright lie. I know, I said, though part of me still struggled against the lifetime of conditioning that made me want to consider whether my mother might have valid points. I know it is manipulative and dishonest, but she probably believes her own version of events. She has probably convinced herself that I actually did all these things she is accusing me of. That does not make it less abusive, Robert said firmly. Believing your own lies does not make them true, or make the impact on the target any less harmful. Your mother created this document to control you, and to recruit other family members to her campaign against you. This is not about helping you or Caleb. This is about punishing you for establishing a boundary she did not like. I took a deep breath and felt something shift inside me. Robert was right. This document was not evidence that I had real problems that needed addressing. It was evidence that my mother would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid accepting responsibility for her own behavior, and to maintain control over me. She would rather construct an elaborate fiction in which I was mentally unwell than simply acknowledge that she had been hurtful and disrespectful. I need to respond to this, I said. I cannot let these accusations stand unchallenged, especially the ones about my mental health and my parenting. She is going to show this to other family members, and use it to justify cutting off my relationship with Caleb if I do not comply with her demands. Robert nodded. Then we respond strategically. We document what actually happened at the party. We save all the messages showing the pattern of harassment. We create our own record of events that any reasonable person can evaluate and see the truth. And if necessary, we consult with a lawyer about protecting our parental rights if your mother tries to take this to an official level. The idea that my mother might actually attempt legal action seemed extreme, But the document I was holding demonstrated that she was willing to go further than I had previously imagined. I needed to take this threat seriously and prepare accordingly. My priority was protecting Caleb and ensuring that my parents could not use manufactured concerns about my mental health to undermine my parenting or claim they needed increased access to my son for his own welfare. That evening, after Caleb was asleep, Robert and I began creating our own documentation. We wrote a detailed account of what had actually occurred at the birthday party, including direct quotes from my mother's criticism and Amanda's fabricated story about me complaining about money. We compiled screenshots of all the text messages showing the harassment campaign. We created a timeline showing the pattern of favoritism toward Amanda and Sophie, compared to the neglect of Caleb and me. We gathered evidence of our financial stability, our involvement in Caleb's education and activities, and the positive reports from his preschool teachers about his development and well-being. The process was exhausting but clarifying. Seeing everything laid out in organized form made the pattern impossible to deny or rationalize. This was not normal family conflict or simple personality differences. This was systematic favoritism and emotional manipulation that had characterized my entire life, and was now extending to the next generation. By the time we finished compiling our documentation, it was past midnight. I felt drained but also strangely calm. I had evidence. I had clarity. I had a partner who saw the situation clearly and supported my right to establish boundaries. And I had a growing certainty that whatever came next, I would not back down or allow myself to be manipulated into accepting treatment that I and my son did not deserve. The days following the delivery of my mother's intervention document unfolded with a strange sense of purpose that I had not experienced before in relation to my family. For the first time in my life, I was not reactive or defensive about their accusations. Instead, I was methodical and strategic, approaching the situation with the same careful analysis I brought to complex patient cases at the hospital. I was building a comprehensive defense not because I believed I had done anything wrong, but because I understood that my mother would escalate her campaign, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Robert and I developed a system for managing the ongoing harassment while protecting our daily life and emotional well-being. We created a dedicated email address specifically for family communications, separate from my personal email, so that I could check it on my own schedule, rather than being ambushed by hostile messages throughout the day. We established clear boundaries about when and how we would engage with any communication from my parents or Amanda. We agreed that I would not respond to emotional manipulation or demands, but would only engage with concrete requests for specific information delivered in respectful tones. The harassment continued unabated for the first week after the birthday party. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that alternated between wounded confusion about why I was treating her so cruelly and angry accusations about my selfishness and ingratitude. Amanda sent long text messages detailing all the ways I was damaging family relationships and hurting people who loved me. My father sent shorter, more plaintive messages asking me to please reconsider my position and remember that family was supposed to forgive and support each other through difficulties. Extended family members continued to contact me as well, though the frequency decreased after the first few days. My Aunt Teresa sent a particularly long email explaining that she had spoken with my mother and was very concerned about the situation. She urged me to remember that parents were not perfect, and that holding grudges over minor incidents would only lead to regret later, when they were gone and I realized how much I had lost by being stubborn and unforgiving. I did not respond to most of these messages. The few times I did reply, I kept my responses brief and factual. When my Aunt Teresa pressed for details about what had actually happened, I sent her a simple paragraph explaining that my mother had criticized my parenting at my son's birthday party after I had overheard her making false statements about my financial situation, and that I had asked her to leave when she refused to stop the criticism. I did not elaborate or defend myself further. I simply stated facts and left it to my aunt to decide what she believed. At work, I found myself drawing strength from my professional competence and the clear boundaries that existed in healthcare settings. I was good at my job. My patients appreciated my care and attention. My colleagues respected my clinical judgment and work ethic. In the hospital, my value was not contingent on managing other people's emotions or accepting mistreatment in the name of maintaining harmony. I was evaluated based on my skills, my knowledge, and my ability to provide excellent patient care. The contrast with my family dynamics was stark and instructive. One afternoon during a particularly challenging shift, I was caring for an elderly woman who was recovering from surgery. Her daughter visited during my rounds, and I observed their interaction with the heightened awareness I had developed since my own family crisis. The daughter was attentive and kind, asking thoughtful questions about her mother's care and treatment plan. She advocated respectfully for her mother's needs, while also expressing gratitude for the medical team's efforts. When her mother became confused due to post-surgical delirium and said something hurtful, the daughter responded with patience and compassion, rather than taking the comments personally. I watched this interaction and felt a deep sadness about what I had never experienced with my own mother. This was what a healthy parent-child relationship looked like. Mutual respect, genuine care, and the ability to navigate difficulties without cruelty or manipulation. My mother had never treated me with this kind of basic dignity and kindness. She had never been able to separate my needs from her own agenda. She had never been able to accept that I was a separate person with valid perspectives and the right to make my own choices. The realization was painful but also liberating. I had spent decades trying to earn something from my mother that she was fundamentally incapable of giving. I had contorted myself trying to be the daughter she wanted instead of accepting that her inability to value me said everything about her limitations and nothing about my worthiness. No amount of achievement or compliance or self-sacrifice would ever be enough because the problem was not with me. The problem was with her inability to see me clearly and love me authentically. 2 weeks after the birthday party, my mother's strategy shifted. The angry voicemails and accusatory text messages stopped abruptly. In their place came messages dripping with artificial sweetness and concern. She texted to say she had been doing a lot of reflection and realized she might have been too harsh in her feedback. She said she missed me and Caleb terribly and just wanted a chance to repair our relationship. She suggested we meet for coffee somewhere neutral where we could talk calmly without distractions. I recognized the tactic immediately. When direct confrontation and social pressure failed to force my compliance, my mother was switching to a softer approach designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining my boundaries. She was betting that I would feel relieved by her apparent willingness to be reasonable and would agree to meet with her, at which point she would gradually work to undermine my position and re-establish the previous dynamic. I discussed the invitation with Robert, who confirmed my interpretation. "This is manipulation wearing a different mask," he said. "She has not actually acknowledged what she did wrong or apologized for her behavior. She has just changed her tone to try a different approach to getting what she wants, which is for you to back down and accept her control." I sent my mother a brief response declining the coffee invitation. I explained that I appreciated her reaching out but was not ready to meet in person yet. I said that when I was ready to have a conversation I would let her know, but that I needed more time and space to process everything that had happened. I kept the message polite but firm, offering no openings for negotiation or debate. Her response came quickly and revealed that the soft approach had been exactly as superficial as I suspected. "So you are just going to keep punishing us indefinitely? How long are you planning to keep our grandson away from us? This is cruel and vindictive, Diana. I raised you better than this." I did not respond to this message or the several that followed in a similar vein. My mother's inability to maintain the reasonable facade for more than a single exchange told me everything I needed to know about the sincerity of her supposed reflection and desire to repair our relationship. During this period, I also began researching family estrangement and psychological manipulation to better understand the dynamics I was experiencing. I found articles about narcissistic family systems, golden child and scapegoat dynamics, and the long-term effects of growing up with conditional love and systematic favoritism. Reading these resources was simultaneously validating and devastating. Every pattern described in the literature matched my experience almost exactly. I was not imagining the dysfunction or being overly sensitive. I was responding rationally to genuinely harmful treatment. One article in particular resonated deeply with me. It discussed how adult children of narcissistic parents often struggle with guilt when establishing boundaries because they have been conditioned to believe that their primary role in the family is to manage the parent's emotions and meet the parent's needs. The article explained that healthy boundaries feel like betrayal to people raised in these systems because they have internalized the message that their own needs are less important than maintaining family harmony. I shared the article with Robert, who read it carefully and then looked at me with compassion. "This is exactly what you are experiencing," he said. "You know intellectually that you have the right to establish boundaries and protect yourself and Caleb, but emotionally you still feel like you are doing something wrong because your mother has spent your entire life teaching you that your job is to accommodate her regardless of the cost to yourself." He was absolutely right. Understanding this dynamic helped me recognize the guilt I felt as a symptom of my conditioning rather than evidence that I was actually in the wrong. The guilt did not mean I should back down or reconsider my boundaries. It meant I was breaking a dysfunctional pattern that had been established over decades, and my emotional responses were still catching up to my intellectual understanding. 3 weeks after the birthday party, Amanda called me directly for the first time since the incident. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up the call. Perhaps I was curious about what approach she would take, or perhaps I hoped that my sister might somehow break from our mother's script and have an authentic conversation with me. "Diana, I am so glad you answered," Amanda said, her voice carefully calibrated to sound warm and concerned. "I have been really worried about you. Mom told me you are refusing to see them or even talk to them. That is not like you. Is everything okay?" The false concern was obvious and insulting. Amanda knew exactly what had happened because she had been there. She had participated in criticizing me and spreading false information about my behavior. Her performance of sisterly worry was transparently designed to make me explain and defend myself, creating an opportunity for her to gather information she could report back to our mother. "I am fine, Amanda," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I have just been setting some boundaries around the kind of treatment I am willing to accept from family members. I am sure Mom has told you her version of what happened at the birthday party, but I am not interested in debating it or trying to convince anyone of my perspective." There was a brief pause before Amanda responded, and when she did, her tone had shifted slightly toward irritation. "Look, I think you are overreacting to what was honestly just Mom trying to be helpful. She cares about you and Caleb. Maybe her delivery was not perfect, but her intentions were good. You know how she is. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" The dismissal was predictable. In Amanda's worldview, shaped by a lifetime of being the favored child, our mother's behavior was normal and my response was excessive. She had never experienced the systematic devaluation I had endured, so she could not or would not recognize it as genuinely harmful. To her, I was simply being difficult and oversensitive about minor imperfections in our mother's communication style. "I am not going to defend my decision to you, Amanda," I said calmly. "I have my reasons for the boundaries I am establishing, and whether you agree with them or not is not really relevant. I need to do what is best for my family." "Your family?" Amanda's voice rose slightly. "We are your family, Diana. Me, Mom, Dad. You cannot just cut us out because you got your feelings hurt over nothing." The characterization of my response as getting my feelings hurt over nothing was designed to minimize the legitimate harm and make me seem childish and irrational. I felt anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "I have not cut anyone out, Amanda. I have asked for space and established some basic boundaries around respectful treatment. If that feels like being cut out to you, perhaps you should examine why you think you are entitled to unlimited access to me regardless of how I am treated." Amanda made a sound of frustrated disbelief. "I cannot believe how selfish you are being. Mom is heartbroken. Dad keeps asking me if I know what they did wrong. And you are just sitting there acting like you are the victim when you are the one who kicked them out of your son's birthday party for no good reason." I took a deep breath and made a decision. "Amanda, I am going to end this conversation now. I am not interested in being lectured or manipulated. If you genuinely want to understand my perspective at some point, I am willing to have that conversation. But if you are just calling to pressure me into backing down, then we do not have anything else to say to each other right now." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation, but I also felt a sense of satisfaction. I had maintained my boundary. I had not allowed myself to be drawn into defending or explaining or justifying. I had stated my position clearly and ended the conversation when it became unproductive. This was progress. Robert had been in the next room during the call and came to check on me afterward. I summarized the conversation and he nodded with approval. "You handled that perfectly. You did not engage with her attempts to make you defend yourself. You just stated your boundary and enforced it when she refused to respect it. Over the following weeks, I continued to maintain firm boundaries while also beginning to actively build a life that was less centered on my family of origin and more focused on the family Robert and I were creating together. We started spending more time with Robert's parents, who lived about an hour away and had always been warm and welcoming, but whom I had kept at a certain distance because I felt uncomfortable with their easy affection and genuine interest in our lives. Their healthy family dynamics had felt almost foreign to me, making me acutely aware of what I had never experienced in my own childhood. Robert's mother, Patricia, had always been kind to me, but our relationship had remained somewhat formal and careful. I realized now that I had been the one maintaining that distance, protecting myself from the vulnerability of accepting genuine maternal warmth from someone after spending my life being rejected by my own mother. During a weekend visit to their home, I found myself talking more openly with Patricia about Caleb's development, my work at the hospital, and even some of the difficulties I was experiencing with my own family. Patricia listened without judgment and then shared something that surprised me. "Diana, I want you to know that I see you. I see how hard you work to be a good mother and a good wife and a good nurse. I see how much love and thought you put into everything you do. And I want you to know that you are always welcome here. Not because you are Robert's wife, but because we genuinely value you as a person." Her words brought tears to my eyes. This was what I had wanted to hear from my own mother my entire life. Simple recognition and validation of my worth as a person. The fact that it came from my mother-in-law rather than the woman who had given birth to me was both painful and healing. It confirmed that the problem was not that I was fundamentally unworthy of this kind of love and acceptance. The problem was that my mother had never been capable of providing it. I also began investing more energy in friendships that I had somewhat neglected, while managing the emotional drain of my family dynamics. I reached out to colleagues from work and parents from Caleb's preschool, accepting invitations to social gatherings and gradually building a support network of people who valued me and enjoyed my company. These relationships felt easier and more authentic than the strained interactions with my family of origin, because they were based on genuine mutual interest rather than obligation and history. At work, I had a conversation with my supervisor about potentially taking on additional leadership responsibilities. I had always been cautious about pursuing advancement because some part of me believed the messages I had internalized growing up about not being as capable or valuable as others. But as I gained clarity about my family dynamics and began to trust my own perceptions and judgment, I also began to recognize that I had genuine skills and talents that deserved to be developed and utilized. My supervisor was enthusiastic about my interest in advancement and mentioned that she had been hoping I would consider taking on more responsibility. She saw leadership potential in me that I had been too conditioned to self-doubt to recognize. We discussed possible paths forward, including additional training and certification that would position me for a charge nurse role within the next year. This professional development felt like an important part of building a life that was defined by my own values and goals, rather than by my family's dismissal and devaluation. I was investing in myself, believing that I was worth the effort and that my contributions had value. This was a fundamental shift from the passive acceptance of less-than treatment that had characterized most of my adult life. One evening about 6 weeks after the birthday party, I was sitting on our back patio after Caleb had gone to bed, enjoying the cooler evening air and reflecting on how much had changed in a relatively short period. My phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up the call. "Diana Hartwell?" A woman's voice I did not recognize. "Yes, this is Diana. My name is Margaret Stevens. I am calling from Child Protective Services in Maricopa County. We received a report expressing concerns about your son Caleb, and I need to schedule a time to visit your home and speak with you about these concerns." My stomach dropped and I felt ice spreading through my chest. For a moment I could not speak, could not process what I was hearing. Then clarity came, sharp and certain. My mother had actually done it. She had reported me to Child Protective Services, using her manufactured concerns about my mental health and parenting to try to force me back under her control. I took a breath and forced my voice to remain calm. "Can you tell me what specific concerns were reported?" Margaret's voice was professional and somewhat sympathetic. "I am not at liberty to share all the details over the phone, but the report indicated concerns about possible mental health issues affecting your parenting, social isolation of the child from extended family, and some questions about the stability of your home environment. I want to assure you that this is just an initial assessment, and that receiving a report does not mean you have done anything wrong. We just need to follow up on all reports we receive to ensure child safety. I understand, I said, my mind already racing ahead to what I would need to do. I am happy to cooperate with your investigation. When would you like to schedule the home visit? We set an appointment for 3 days later. After ending the call, I sat in the darkness of our patio feeling a mixture of rage, hurt, and cold determination. My mother had weaponized the child welfare system to punish me for establishing boundaries. She had made false reports designed to frighten me and undermine my parental authority. This was no longer just family dysfunction or even garden variety manipulation. This was a calculated attack that could have serious consequences for my family. I called Robert outside and told him about the call. His reaction was immediate fury followed quickly by strategic thinking. We have all the documentation we need to show this is a retaliatory report, he said. We have your mother's intervention document making these same accusations. We have the harassment messages. We have evidence of your job stability, our financial security, Caleb's excellent reports from preschool. This investigator is going to see very quickly that this report is unfounded. The 3 days between receiving the call from Child Protective Services and the scheduled home visit passed in a state of controlled urgency. Robert and I approached the situation with the same methodical preparation we had applied to documenting my family's harassment, but now the stakes felt exponentially higher. This was not just about protecting my emotional well-being or establishing healthy boundaries. This was about protecting my family from a government agency that had the power to disrupt our lives based on false allegations from someone with a demonstrated pattern of manipulation and dishonesty. We began by organizing our existing documentation into a format that would be clear and compelling to an outside investigator. I created a timeline that showed the escalating conflict with my parents, starting with the text message claiming they could not afford to contribute to Caleb's birthday, and moving through the shopping trip I had witnessed, the birthday party confrontation, the harassment campaign that followed, and finally the intervention document my mother had delivered to our home. Each entry included dates, direct quotes from messages or voicemails when available, and brief objective descriptions of what had occurred. Robert compiled financial documentation that demonstrated our stability and responsible management of resources. He gathered bank statements showing consistent income and savings, mortgage payment records proving we were current on all obligations, and receipts for Caleb's preschool tuition and medical care. He created a summary showing that we maintained appropriate insurance coverage, had emergency savings, and lived well within our means despite my mother's characterization of my spending as excessive and irresponsible. I contacted Caleb's preschool and requested copies of all his progress reports and teacher assessments from the past year. The director of the preschool was surprised by the request but accommodating, providing me with comprehensive documentation that painted a picture of a happy, well-adjusted child who was meeting all developmental milestones and thriving in the structured environment of his classroom. His teachers described him as curious, kind to his peers, and eager to learn. They noted that he had strong language skills, good emotional regulation for his age, and positive relationships with both adults and other children. I also scheduled an appointment with Caleb's pediatrician and explained the situation in general terms, saying that some family members had raised concerns about his well-being, and I wanted comprehensive documentation of his health status and development. The pediatrician was immediately supportive, expressing confidence that any objective evaluation would show Caleb was receiving excellent care. She provided me with a letter summarizing his medical history, noting that he was up to date on all vaccinations, had attended all recommended well-child visits, and showed no signs of neglect or concerning development issues. She included growth charts demonstrating that he was developing normally in both height and weight, and she noted that I had always been attentive and responsive when she provided guidance or recommendations about his care. Robert and I also prepared our home for inspection with meticulous attention to detail. We were fortunate that we maintained a clean and organized household as a matter of course, but we went through each room with fresh eyes to ensure nothing could be misinterpreted or used to support allegations of instability or neglect. We made sure Caleb's room was tidy but clearly lived in, with age-appropriate toys and books visible. We organized our kitchen to show we had adequate healthy food available. We reviewed safety measures throughout the house, checking that cleaning supplies were stored appropriately, outlets had covers where needed, and smoke detectors were functional. During this preparation period, I continued to receive messages from my mother that ranged from the saccharine sweet attempts to lure me into conversation to more openly hostile accusations about my cruelty in keeping Caleb away from his grandparents. None of the messages acknowledged or even obliquely referenced the CPS report. Either she genuinely believed I would not figure out she was the source, or she did not care whether I knew because she felt confident the investigation would vindicate her concerns and prove she had been right to involve authorities. The latter possibility made me deeply angry. My mother had weaponized a system designed to protect genuinely endangered children, using it as a tool to punish me for establishing boundaries she did not like. She was wasting the time and resources of caseworkers who should be focused on actual cases of abuse or neglect. She was putting my family through the stress and anxiety of an investigation to serve her own agenda of maintaining control over me. The selfishness and callousness of this action clarified something important. This was not a woman who loved me but struggled with showing it appropriately. This was a woman who valued control over my well-being, and who was willing to cause significant harm to reassert that control when challenged. On the morning of the scheduled home visit, I took a personal day from work so I could be completely present and focused during the meeting. Robert also arranged to work from home so he could participate in the conversation. We had discussed whether to tell Caleb anything about the visit, and decided to present it simply as a nice lady who would be coming to see our house and talk with us. We did not want to frighten him or make him anxious about something he could not fully understand at his age. Margaret Stevens arrived exactly on time, pulling up to our house in an unmarked sedan and approaching our door with a professional but not unfriendly demeanor. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she had seen difficult situations and learned not to make quick judgments. I invited her in and offered her coffee or water, trying to project calm hospitality despite my internal anxiety. She accepted water and settled into our living room, pulling out a tablet and a notebook. "Before we begin, I want to reiterate what I mentioned on the phone," she said. "Receiving a CPS report does not mean you have done anything wrong. My job is simply to assess the concerns that were raised and ensure that your son is safe and well cared for. I will be asking you some questions, observing your home and your interactions with Caleb, and gathering information that will help me complete my assessment. You are welcome to ask me questions at any time, and you can have documentation or other materials you think would be helpful for me to review." I appreciated her straightforward approach and decided to be equally direct. "I understand the process and I want to cooperate fully," I said. "I should tell you up front that I know who made this report and I have reason to believe it is retaliatory rather than based on genuine concerns about my son's welfare. I have documentation that I think provides important context, and I would like to share it with you before we proceed." Margaret nodded without seeming surprised. It is not uncommon for reports to come from family members during custody disputes or other conflicts. "Why don't you show me what you have? And then I will proceed with my standard assessment questions and observations." I handed her the folder we had prepared, which included the timeline of events, copies of key text messages and voicemails, the intervention document my mother had delivered, and all the positive documentation about Caleb's development and our family's stability. She spent about 20 minutes reviewing everything carefully, occasionally making notes on her tablet, or asking clarifying questions about specific incidents or dates. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with an expression that seemed to combine sympathy and professional detachment. "This is very thorough documentation, and it does provide helpful context. The concerns raised in the report do appear to align closely with the complaints your mother outlined in this intervention document she created. That said, I still need to complete my standard assessment process. Can you tell me about Caleb's daily routine and how you and your husband share parenting responsibilities?" For the next hour, Margaret asked detailed questions about every aspect of our family life and Caleb's care. She wanted to know about his sleep schedule, his meals, his activities and social interactions. She asked about discipline strategies and how we handle behavioral challenges. She inquired about our extended family relationships and support systems. She asked about my work schedule and childcare arrangements. She explored our financial situation and how we budgeted for Caleb's needs. She questioned us about any stresses we were experiencing and how we managed them. Throughout this questioning, I tried to answer honestly and completely without being defensive or over-explaining. I described our daily routines in matter-of-fact terms, acknowledging the normal challenges of balancing work and parenting, while emphasizing the systems we had in place to ensure Caleb received consistent care and attention. I explained our decision to limit contact with my parents following the birthday party incident, framing it as a boundary we established to protect our family from ongoing conflict and criticism, rather than as isolation or alienation of Caleb from his grandparents. Robert participated actively in the conversation, describing his role in Caleb's care and his observations of my parenting. His calm, confident responses seemed to reassure Margaret that we were a united parenting team with shared values and approaches. When she asked about the specific allegations regarding my mental health, Robert was particularly effective in addressing them directly while providing context. My wife has never been diagnosed with or treated for any mental health condition, he said. She is a skilled nurse who manages high-stress situations at work with professionalism and competence. The suggestion that she has untreated postpartum depression or anxiety appears to be something her mother invented to justify her concerns rather than based on any actual symptoms or behaviors. Diana is one of the most emotionally stable and reliable people I know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.